Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Caroline Mays. Caroline is a writer and the creator of Switchblade Lemonade, a defiantly unorthodox image crafting and bio writing salon that's changed the meaning of the word bio by elevating its purpose from obligatory drivel to Epic Credential, designed to open doors and claim an audience for professionals spearheading a movement. She believes your bio should be so good, you could make a movie out of it. Caroline is also an amazing storyteller, and she thinks stories are all around us. Buildings tell stories, quilts tell stories, everything is a story. And she also thinks people don't use the word story anywhere near enough. Now, looking at her face, I think if I keep going like this, she'll get an actual switchblade out. So, ladies and gentlemen, Caroline Mays. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Francisco. You started to get me there at the end. I was like, wait, where's it? Where's this going from?
Yes, I am.
So mad right
Through
now.
your interviews and through your newsletter, I am very well aware that you think the word story is very overused, and quilts and buildings do not tell stories.
They probably do to architects and quilters, but but it's like, I think you might need to, I don't know, embellish that a little bit more and let us know what you mean, because I'm lost,
Yes, and just to clarify something that I was slightly confused about when I was looking you up online, you're also not the same Caroline Mays that goes by Carrie Yoga Bunny on Instagram, right?
I'm not. I don't even know about Carrie Yoga Bunny. She's
Yes,
really
there
into
you go. So
yoga,
the
I guess.
next time, if you Google Caroline, I thought that this doesn't seem to me like the same person. It's just a very different outlook on life and, and everything else. And I realized I had been going down the wrong research path.
Right. Wow. I hope that's not happening too much to people out there. They're like, oh, I was into this girl, but all she talks about is yoga. That's funny. I'll have to look her up.
Well, I mean, beautiful Instagram photos, but
Oh,
but
okay.
apart
It's
from
definitely
that.
not me. Yeah. I'm always like, I guess I can post a picture of my dog.
Right. So I don't usually like to ask the same questions that everybody else asks, but if I don't ask you this question, then almost nothing else we'll talk about will make any sense for people that are not familiar with your work yet. So what is the problem with bios and about sections as we normally know them that you felt needed to be completely obliterated?
Well, that's a big question because it's a lot of stuff. I mean, first of all, they're written, I mean, you know how they're written in these very kind of stale cracker way. And so I think we're so used to resumes and cover letters and kind of jumping through these really formal hoops that when we are asked to say something about ourselves, we don't know. We kind of approach it in this, you know, what do I say about myself kind of question, instead of like, what do I need people to know, as it pertains to them. And so, yeah, they're just absolutely, they cannot even come close to like scratching the surface of who a person is. And they're almost insulting with how boring they are. I mean, people are out there living lives, having experiences, going through shit. And this is what we have to say about ourselves, just like this really, as I say, in that intro there, as you said, like it's just kind of obligatory, going through the motions kind of writing.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people have a go, not necessarily at bios or about sections, but about job titles. And I think you said, I think, no, I know you said something which I thought was beautifully said, which was that job titles can't support the weight of what people actually do.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting look at it, because the fact that they're boring, I think most people will easily agree to. They're boring. They don't start a conversation. They're the easiest way to end a conversation, particularly depending
Yes.
on what is it that you do. But I think you were particularly talking about things like coach or advisor or consultant,
Mhm.
that have job titles have become rife these days.
Yeah.
So when you say they don't support the weight of what the person actually does, what do you mean by that? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of coaches and consultants, and you know, they're different in a lot of ways. They're similar in a lot of ways as well. I mean, but there's a whole person that has their own particular approach and their own particular energy, personality, if you will, that they're bringing to the table, their own, ideas and wisdoms, et cetera, et cetera. And so people get really hung up on because they hate those words, right? I hate the word copywriter. It doesn't do me any justice. But also, I think um, spending a lot of time coming up with these really creative, confusing ways to talk about what we do is a little bit of a waste of time just coming up with the perfect title, because you can flush it out a little bit better in other ways, just by you can give people a whole sentence if you want to. You're not going to give them, if you're not a teacher, if you're not a police officer, if you're not a fireman, if you do kind of live in this, an esoteric world, like compared to most people, then they're going to have a hard time knowing. And in a lot of cases, they don't they don't really need to know what you do, and it depends on where you are to what you're going to give people. So yeah, I like, if you're at a party, you're not going to give people this like elaborate thing that you do, and because they're not interested, they're just asking those obligatory questions. And so anyway, I just feel like there's lots of creative exercises that I'm sure you've seen on LinkedIn, right, where they'll say something like start with, they just like give people some kind of what's the word that I'm looking for, like just some sort of
A
template.
template,
Yeah,
template or a
exactly.
framework.
Yeah, and like those work, and they're all a little bit different. I mean, pick one and and go for it. I just don't think it's where you need to spend your time.
Yeah, there's the one that most people talk about, which is, I help X do Y
Mm-hmm.
through Z.
That's a good one.
I've Yeah, it works fine. It's a bit boring. And it's easy for things to sound samey. And I had a conversation a while back with a copywriter who has an engineering background and almost only works with technology stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
his approach was, tell me what you do without telling me what you do.
Mm.
So his headline on LinkedIn is, I can explain tech to my mom.
Oh, I love
And
that.
he had this idea that, not idea, but the first 55 characters of a LinkedIn headline are the only thing you can always see wherever you go on LinkedIn. So if you're commenting on a post, they can read about 55 characters. They cannot read anything past that. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to have something cute, that's probably the place to have it, because then it will encourage people to do something else. I toyed around with a few, and when I was on the podcast with this guy James Lorraine, I said, yeah, mine was something like, I help people attract their ideal clients, whatever, through the power of story. And then I said, but I could just say, become more interesting than Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
And he liked that, and I thought, well, let's give that one a go and see if I'm not sued. And
Mm-hmm.
I have given it a go, and it's a conversation starter. So a lot of people go, oh, that's quite nice, and I like that. Or some people are like, what do you mean by that? But I wouldn't use that with anyone I'm not trying to have a conversation. So my mom says, so what are you doing these days? Because I'm not sure I understand. Mom, I help people become more interesting than Netflix. I
Yeah.
mean, it would just
You say,
be
wow, you're
really
really full of
creepy.
yourself. Yeah.
Yes, I think it has to be said with a particular smirk. Otherwise, you come across, yes. you come across like a right douche, and that wasn't the intention.
Right. Yeah, I
Okay, fine.
wouldn't
So,
I wouldn't go down that hole with my own mom either. So I think that's how, like, a
but to be fair,
universal, yeah,
I
feeling.
don't know if I ever want to talk professional stuff with my mom. That is just the truth of it. Because my mom
No,
doesn't want to know. She wants to know if I'm making any money. And it says, "What are you doing?"
yeah,
It's okay, man. It's going well. It's all right.
right. Are you making money? Are you happy? Are you healthy? Are you alive?
Yes,
That's all that matters.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Yes, it's I'm okay, and I'm not doing anything illegal. That's
right.
just about
Yeah,
everything she really needs to
exactly.
know.
Yeah, yeah. Netflix isn't out for me yet.
Yes. Yeah, so when it comes to the about section, which is where a lot of people get to develop a little bit more what is it that they do and who they are. Yeah, there's the obvious super boring CV style one that I think
Mhm,
a lot of people have now realized you probably shouldn't do, just our list of accomplishments. I mean,
mhm.
plenty of people still do that, but I think most people in the like entrepreneurs and self-employed people probably most realize that they need to be slightly more interesting than that. But then I've seen you talk about how a lot of people then think the way forward is to be cute, and make jokes and just kind of try and say something funny, but that's not really what you advocate for at all, though, is it?
Right. Yeah, yeah, it's either cute or it depends on what the trend is, right? Like right now, it's been this way for a while. Like you want to be really sassy and bold and drop some F bombs in there because that's the way you talk. And so that's been hot for a while. And then yeah, being cute. Um, and then I think I mean I hate to like genderize it, but I feel like women tend to be cute and and then men maybe try and be a little more machismo. And so and again, that's a pretty broad stroke that I'm taking there, but sometimes it seems like it does kind of fall in those categories a bit. And yeah, I think a lot of business talk or just anyone who's kind of operating in this realm, it seems like they do it's a very we kind of show up in these very condescending ways, and talk down to each other in a very cute, friendly, uh, superficial way. So everyone's real
All right, so
nice.
that's so that's a lot of what's wrong with the way people write these things. But one of the other issues, and one that I think you highlight a lot, and a lot of people might not have ever thought of it this way, is that if you have a super boring bio or about section, that is a wasted opportunity, because the most people don't ever think of their bio as not as sales opportunities, not what I'm going for. They don't think of that as their marketing. They don't think of that as one of the best places to have a much broader explanation or illustration of who they are as a person or what their brand is about. But that, if I think, is essentially what you are advocating for, right? That bio is sort of the gateway into. I know you don't like the word brand, but that's how most people would understand it.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And it is kind of it's this real estate place, right? But I don't think people realize that you can build on top of it. Like it will inform so many other things that you say about yourself, that you say about your work, if you really kind of come to terms with what you can say about yourself. And like what is your perspective? What are some of your ideas? What are those little hidden bits of wisdom that you carry with you don't even know? um those can be, and I hate to use this word, but sort of capitalized on just by recognizing that they exist and using them in your work. Either when you're talking about yourself or talking about what you do, or just kind of the flavor in which you want to show up, right? So, yeah, it's not just like to have something cool to say in a particular space on your website. It's also this, like, it should be a wellspring of where, you know, yeah, ideas and where the essence of you, if you will, kind of comes from.
You're really resisting the word brand, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I use
You're dancing around it.
their brand, but God, I have so many words that I step around. So
I know it's a minefield. It's a
it
minefield.
is.
you, you don't- but and I think, but I think it's important. It's important to realize that how many people don't get that. Yes, the word brand and the word story and the word storytelling, they've all been done to death. But the problem is that they've been done wrong. A lot of people don't get. Like, I hate this. This always happens on LinkedIn. It drives me insane. Story time, like hashtag story time. Like, one, don't ever announce it. Two, people don't know it. They're not telling a story. They are just like, oh, when I was a kid, I hated this, and that has been always the case. I still hate it. It's not a story. It's like a
Right.
statement
And
of
what I want you to
opinion. It's
know
something
is
that
that, yeah, then they kind
is
of
like
give you
that
the
is
lesson.
don't put storyteller on your profile and then, because I check. But every time I see that, I go, let me check, just check, and then I go to their
Right,
activity and look at like 10 posts, not one story. Not one story. So it's
right.
like, if you're gonna do it, at least do it. But the same goes to brand. I think a lot of people don't realize that if you know where you're coming from, if you know what you stand for, if you know the way you help people and what experiences informed your ability to do so, that should show, that should come across throughout your business presence, wherever that manifests. And that's what most people would think of as a brand. The brand is not the logo. It's not like whatever the catchphrase or just a company name. And I think a lot of people just don't even think of that it could be more than those things.
No, I don't. I mean, that's kind of a rookie mistake that people are thinking of their logos and their colors as their brand. I mean, it's part of your visual brand for sure. Um, so yeah, it's kind of this big, kind of malleable thing, what you mean by brand. But in terms of their words, right, the things that they're saying, I think that, I don't know, people don't. I had a client or someone that's in one of my courses tell me recently. She was like, I just realized that, like, when I would write something, I would think that I got my point across and that's all that mattered. But in terms of really thinking about the reader and how they were experiencing anything that she was saying, like, hadn't crossed her mind. And so I think that's part of the glitch too, is you're like, well, I've said it. I've said what I need to say about myself. And you're not thinking about the performance of your language, um, and what the experience is on the other side and how it isn't getting through or meaning anything to anybody.
Yeah,
So
so I think we might as well jump into what is it exactly that you do, because again, I sometimes forget that, because I have spent hours and hours in your online company, so to speak. Other people haven't, so they might have no clue exactly what is it that you do. So, what is the shortest possible way you can describe what your bios look like?
what they look like,
Yeah, so when you work with someone, the bio that you produce for them, I mean, I could try to describe it, but I'd rather you do it.
Yeah. Well, so I think it helps to use the long form of the word, which is biography, which is the story of your life, so to speak. Of course, we know that we're not meaning like we can't write a book here. We have to have something that's very modern, that's usable for the internet medium, um, that could be used for video. It could be used for uh, illustrations. It has multiple uses. And so, anyway, it is a quote unquote story. And as you probably know, I've referred to those as an epic credential, which is something that I had trademarked for whatever reason. But it's like, um, it's that invisible bullet point. Again, that thing that you don't get to say about yourself, which is where are you coming from? Where do you hail from? And so, yeah, we could start from the beginning. We could start somewhere in the middle. We could start with something recently. And so, anyway, that's another reason why I hesitate with the word story. But I think, um, you know, biography at least gets a little bit closer with the understanding that it's going to be a specific portion of your biography that we use. So,
The the closest the closest definition that I can come to that is the one I use, although what I'm doing is not exactly what you're doing when I do that, but it's a term other people use as well, which is origin story, in the sense of when did okay so this is, I have a feeling you might hate this, but so the way I talk to people about this is I say, okay, perhaps because I read too many superhero comic books, I say, we need to figure out what your power is. So what is it that you do, what is it that you're really good at, that we need to get across here? How do you help
mhm.
people? um, Once we know what your power is, then we probably can find somewhere in your past some pain that is connected to that power. Maybe the thing that motivated you to get good at it, or what you suffered from not being good at it, or that you saw that people struggle with. And once you have the pain and the power, we probably find a purpose somewhere in there. And that's the way I guide that conversation, is because we could, if we're going to tell a story of your life, we could go in any direction we want, and we could end up with many different things. But usually you're writing that to show people that you're either very good at something or you're very passionate about something. So so that's, I think, the closest thing I've seen done or described to the process you do. And because I believe that when you do that with people, you are obviously trying to, that is being used to show them as one specific version of themselves, the one that has usually to do with what they're doing professionally, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going. It's written for that audience, right? That ideal person that they have in mind. Um, yeah, and that's cool what you're saying. I think for me, it doesn't even have to be like power, purpose, like all those words that we use. But even just like perspective. Again, I use the word wisdom, which isn't trendy at all, but it's like, how do you see the world, and how does that insight of how is that used to help other people? And so, yeah, I guess you could refer to that as a superpower. But I guess the word superpower, or that phrase, it's like, it sounds like a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I have this power. But it can really be something as simple as your outlook on life, you know? And people's outlook on
I,
life can be something that when it's rephrased, or when it's written in a way that really punches people in the gut, um, just giving something new momentum with the language behind it is powerful in and of itself. So, does that make sense?
Yes, keep in mind that completely. Keep in mind that you are talking to a guy who has named his business Storypowers and has a little Wolverine
Yeah.
figurine on the corner. So
Yeah.
it's less that I'm one of those people who's like, what is your superpower? And more that I'm a complete nerd, and anything I can make a comic book tie-in, I will.
Right.
Actually, when I on my like course bootcamp thingy that I have, the whole origin story thing is like, okay, this is now when I get a chance to talk about Spider-Man.
Right.
So, and that's part of the great power comes great responsibility. So and also I'm a sucker for alliteration. So
Yes.
that
Right.
explains the sort of somewhat lofty, highfalutin like power, pain, purpose. It's like it's the superheroes that explains
Right.
most of it. So
That's cool. Yeah. That's like
uh,
that's part of how you think, which is cool.
yes, very much so. Yeah, so okay, so because I read I read a few of yours. Like I've read yours. I've read I think maybe two or three of the stories you've done for other clients. And the impression I've got is that at least the ones I've seen, it was typically this. Okay, let's tell usually a story, but not always a story, as most
Hmm.
people, at least as I would understand it. From something in the past, there is some inciting incident in some cases that
Hmm.
led them to start doing what they're doing now. I'm thinking particularly of the person who I think it was a burnout. He was going through burnout and then had was almost driving the car off the road, didn't, and then later started a business about helping people avoid burnout. So
Yeah.
in that particular case, that to me is like a slightly more straightforward, what I would call an origin story. But
Hmm.
yours is not so much that you're
No.
not relating anything specific in your past. It's more a mood than a moment.
Yeah. Sure. Well, okay. So that first example that you cited was about someone who was bullied at work, and that kind of initiated this suicide attempt. Some people have those stories, right? I mean, a lot of people have, I guess, what is, kind of these pivotal moment stories, right? But for whatever reason, they don't want to use it. So that client came to me and was like, here's my story, right? And the challenge there, and this is always the challenge with anyone who has like this thing happen. I call it the I almost died but didn't story. Like I almost died, but I didn't die. And I
I
got the
I
call, the
I I
diagnosis.
I call that a kung fu moment because I
Oh, I like
watched too
that.
much
Yeah.
Matrix, and
Yeah.
as the moment when Neo comes out and goes, "I know kung fu."
Right. It's been
Yeah.
downloaded. Yes, exactly. And so I think if it's okay to tell those stories, but you have to be really careful with how you tell them, because they're so overdone, and because they're so trite. They can easily be so trite. Like, this thing happened to me, and then I realized that life was worth living. And I'm here to tell you guys that this is how you live it, in my 7 Easy Steps by my book. Right. And so we're smarter than that now. I think people with taste don't like it. And I like to think that most people, are at least aware of it, that's dumb. And so, yeah, and I think it keeps people. I think those I almost died but didn't stories, those kung fu stories, they keep people from telling stories, because they're like, I don't have that, or I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about my cancer diagnosis. My friend, who's also a coach, has a cancer diagnosis story. Sadly, that's like, that happens a lot. So yeah. So what do you want to say about yourself? And that's something that I always stress. Like, it doesn't have to be that moment. It can really just be about like what you've been doing with yourself. Like, that's kind of the flavor of mine. It's like starts off a little bit origin story ish, And then I just used it as a parallel to talk about my writing life. Like I use my running life and my writing life and kind of parallel those two. And so anyway, yeah, so it can be kind of an aggregate of little bitty stories. It can be like this one specific story. It could be like, you know, I have Asperger's, and like, here's how I run my business with that thing without making this person the Asperger's guy, right? There's always like this little shimmy that you're trying to do to keep it from being that cheesy story that we're expecting. Does that make sense?
So it does, and I've had many a rant against uh, the idea of the one story that defines you, or the one story that anyone else would
Yeah.
actually be interested in hearing. And I've somewhat disappointed people with mine, because what I have on my about section is this, something that only came to me not that long ago. I remembered it was, I was 12 years old, and the horrible dream where you're standing in front of the classroom and everybody's waiting for you to speak and you're terrified, and that actually happened. And the teacher had said something like, please come up here and tell a story to the whole class. And
Mm-hmm.
then my classmates, half of them were horrified and the other half were, really looking forward to see me crash and burn.
Right.
And as I went up there, I realized that I was terrified, but I was also kind of excited. And it was because I didn't I didn't fit into that school, because it was like a fancy private school, and my family
Mm-hmm.
didn't have much money. I had some sort of scholarship or something for me to go there. But then, I couldn't dress the same way the other kids did. When they went on school trips, I could never go with them. They invited me to their house. I got super embarrassed to invite them back to mine. And then as I'm walking up there, I'm thinking, maybe, what if they really, like, the stupid things kids think, right? What if they really like my story? Maybe this
Right.
could be what changes everything for me. uh and they did. Like, they really liked the story. They laughed and they cheered. They asked me for more. And I don't think I go in, and at that moment I did feel super, super popular, and I felt like I definitely fit in. And a lot of people go like, and that is when, that's what started everything. I was like, no, because I was stupid. Like, I didn't like take that as any sort. Like, it was great, and it was definitely a
Yeah.
moment that highlighted the power of stories to me. But like, the bell went off, and I went into recess, and I was just like, I'm just the same nerd again. Like, I didn't go like,
Right.
I'm now a new person.
Right. Yeah. You're the
And
popular guy in
so
school.
it's, I mean, I can use, and I do use that, as there's many different things I do with, and I tell it properly. But stories have been with me for a long time. There's a whole bunch of other near misses where I should have paid attention and actually gone into the writing or storytelling path, and I didn't for years and years and years. And that's
Mhm.
what the whole story is that I never really paid attention to that until I eventually did. But a lot of people are looking for the super tidy thing, where it's like,
Right.
oh yes, and then at 12 years old I learned that it was all about storytelling. I was like, no, it
Right.
wasn't.
Right.
Unfortunately it wasn't.
What
So
did you do?
when
What
you
did you do instead?
oh geez. The near misses were that. So I was a nerdy kid. I used to read a lot. I liked writing. The teacher liked my writing, which is why she asked me to tell the stories. And this is the part I never actually mentioned. But the story was about the detective tapeworm, who was a down at heel detective that was always hungry and never never solved any cases because he was too focused on food. um, and he
Uh-huh.
had some hygiene problems as well. uh, to be honest, it was kind of like so inspired, it was near plagiarized to some detective that existed. But I was 12, like, I didn't know any better. I was like, I could do something with this idea. And then I did my version of the idea. And I remember going up in front of the class and telling that story, two or three stories from that, because I kept writing them 2 or 3 times. But I didn't ever do anything with it. And when I got to university, I was thinking, at that point, I was like, I'm going to do journalism because I love stories, I
Yeah.
love writing, and that's the way to do it. But my father, never gave me any advice, said, "Oh, but
Yeah.
it's very difficult to make a living as a journalist. You should do advertising, which is lots more opportunities." And because I had gone to a school where I didn't fit in my mind because of money, the money thing was always part of the story in my head. I was like,
Right.
"Oh, maybe that's a good idea, maybe." And then I ended up eventually getting into like financial services, and I made money, and it was always fine, and I was just bored out of my mind. And then
Yeah.
at some point, a whole bunch of stuff happened. And eventually I was like, okay, fine, I need to do something that I actually care about. And I need to do something that I
This is
feel like
the
getting
rat
out
story,
of
right?
bed for.
Yeah.
Sorry?
So this is the rat
Yeah.
story,
Yeah.
right? You
The
you
red
went down.
story. Yeah. So
Oh, you went downstairs to kill a
yeah.
rat,
So
and
I, yeah. So I used to have that as part of the story, and then it was one of the things that eventually led me to do something else. But I so if anyone who hasn't listened to this, it's just this. I had this what I called my almost near death experience when I thought someone had broken into my house and I was gonna fight this burglar, and it turned out to just be a very big rat. But I thought I was gonna face a life and death experience and reevaluated my life, and that was definitely part of it. But as I started sort of telling it, I found that there was just one thing too many.
yeah.
And then I dropped that part. And then the true turning point for me doing what I do now was that when I found out I was going to have a second kid, because in spite
Mhm.
of already having one and being a grown up, I still don't know how that process works, apparently.
Right.
So it caught me completely by surprise. And I was like, oh, I'm a grown, like I have a real job. I'm married. I'm going to have two kids. This is it. This is the rest of my life now. And I'm like, no, this cannot be it. I need to do something else.
Right.
And that's when I started doing this. But we've gone completely off piece from what I was trying to say, which was that so when I was trying to figure out what went into my story, again, there's so many different ways you can go with that, right? So I I wanted to have something in there that showed that story was part of my life and had been part of my life from an early age, even though it's not what I'd done for most of my life. But I also wanted to have the true facts of how I eventually felt unfulfilled and I needed something else in my life. That feeling of, there's got to be more than this. But when you help someone craft that, how important is something like showing their competence or their experience at the particular thing that they're positioning themselves of? Is that a
Mhm.
must or not necessarily?
It's a good question. I would say it is not a must because you have so many opportunities to talk about the actual deliverable or the actual service that you're providing. That would be in a sales page, right? However, that said, there are things that you want to you're I mean, there are things that you're going to again, you have a specific person that you're talking to. So you're telling them things about yourself that are relevant to them, which doesn't have to be about, well, it's never really about the service or the offering. But it is about, again, that perspective piece on how you approach your work, or what's at the very fulcrum of your beliefs that informs your work. Yeah, or what's that little thing of insight, right, that needs to be, highlighted so that everything else makes sense that you say about yourself, right? So yeah, I think that it's doing a lot. There's a lot of nuance there, like with what it's actually doing and what it's communicating. Um, but yeah, you don't have to hit people over the head with it. That's for a sales page. And that's what I'm always reminding, again, like my quote unquote students is like, because they want to shove it all in, and then they'd have a 5-page piece. And it's like, you don't need that. Save it, it doesn't have to do everything. That's a lot of pressure on the story and yourself.
Yeah, also because you're really gonna struggle to then find the the shareable version of that. When I in my course, I have something which is, I call it there's a 15-second story, which is not really a story, it's more like a line to get people to have a conversation, a 30-second story, and a 1-minute story. Now, I can tell my school story in under 1 minute. I mean, that's
Right.
easy enough. I struggle to do much more than that. Like, if I wanted to get I did a job and I was unfulfilled, like, I would really have to hurry, and it would be really awkward that I would be trying to cram that much information in one go. But if you have a 5-page thing, where are people going to read that? Because
Right.
they'll read 3 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs on an about section if it's super interesting, or a 1 minute, 2-minute video. They're not going to watch a 10-minute video where you share your whole life's journey. I mean, unless
Right.
you're super interesting already, in which case, you know,
Right.
they might not
Yeah.
have needed your services to begin with.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good. Where and who would actually read this 5-page piece? That's one thing. Yeah. Also, I mean, people ask me about length all the time, and I have a length that mine tend to be, which is about a page, page and a half, and there's a lot of breaks in there, line breaks. Um, but also, I think, again, it's important to know, even if someone doesn't read the whole thing, you now have this information that you are pulling from, and you have this information that turns into keynote speak keynotes, or I've had people make presentations, and again, of course, there's like the movies and the videos and stuff that people have made, but it's also, yeah, it's something that you keep referring back to, and that steadies you in the course, which is part of the function of the thing, right? It isn't always just to be read, because you're right, not everybody's going to sit down and read it. They'll have a better chance of reading it. It's not 5 pages long, but yeah.
But and that leads me to something that you might feel more comfortable than I do talking about. But this is something I start as I done more of this origin story type of work with people. I started finding something that I'm still trying to figure out how to handle, which is it it kind of becomes, or can feel like, therapy to some people. And
Mhm.
I had this experience not that long ago, and I asked her for a timeline. There's one of the exercise in the course, a timeline. So just give, do the timeline exercise, and then send that to me, and then we'll talk about it and see what comes out. And she actually had a go at writing the story, and it was like 2 or 3 pages long or whatever. So I'm asking her a whole bunch of questions about it, and at some point I said, I said, is it just me, or sort of your whole life story, you move in between these two extremes because this was sort of how you're raised to think you should behave, and then you rebel when you go into the opposite stream, and this has happened at least like 5 times in all the stuff
Mhm.
you told me. And as soon as I said that, she just went like this, huh, hmm. No, not now that you say that, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm like, oh
Yeah.
crap, what have I what have I done now? And and it, but I find it like I'm clearly not qualified to be having these conversations. I'm just looking at it from a narrative point of view. I'm trying to make sense of it. But like, do you get that all the time as well?
Yeah, I do. And I love those moments though, because like that alone is like worth people's time and money, like to know these things about themselves, and then they can own that. I mean, I wouldn't know how to say like go forward with that information, here's how you mend your relationships that you've destroyed because of this or that thing, right? Um but yeah, I think that's part of the beauty of the process, is people glean so much about themselves, and their lives make a little bit more sense to them. And then of course you can own it and like, that's who you are. You're this person that's vacillating between these two extremes, like always has to be on an adventure or whatever, and that I don't know, it's solid ground for people, to kind of hang out there. Yeah.
So if you ever wanted to stop doing what you're doing and make a slight pivot into basically the same career but with a vomit-inducing job title and description, you could call yourself a life coach that helps people own their story.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm joking here, but
I know, yeah. I'm like, my brain is like exploding. I'm like, that would be a nightmare. I could never tell myself what I did. Yeah. Own your
and I'm
story.
joking, but I'm joking, but I'm not, in the sense that I am 100% certain that what happens with a lot of people that work with you, and happens, I'm sure, with some that work with me, is that you've given them a story about themselves that is incredibly cool, that makes sense, that shows them as a person with direction, with a goal, with capabilities, with a journey that is not just a random hodgepodge of stuff happening to them. In a sense, you've given them agency, and even if they never use that for any commercial purposes, I think there's a lot of like life coaches and therapists that aim to do that very thing. So if
Yeah.
they got nothing else out of the exercise, but they felt a lot more confident and about themselves and thought that their life journey or whatever you want to call it is actually pretty cool, that in
Yes.
itself has a lot of value for, I think, people's mental and emotional well-being. I keep telling people that at the end of the day, we own your story. At the end of the day, you have to decide what things mean. Right? Just, you get something happen, you figure out what it means, and then you can tell that as a story. If you don't know what it means, it's very difficult to tell it as a story. And
Hmm.
if you're doing that exercise to just give meaning to the stuff that happened in your life, at the end of the day, you're choosing that meaning. There's
Yeah.
only so much you can do. They can't completely change it if it was something else, but you can try. And
Mhm.
and I think that to a lot of people, that alone is going to give them the super feel good factor after having done the job, regardless of any commercial benefits, of which I'm sure there will be plenty of benefits and uses for that story. I'm not
Mhm.
sure if you would. I don't think I'll ever advertise it as such when I'm doing
Right.
with them.
Yeah. 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 You might not use it, but you'll carry it with you in your heart. Yeah. That's a tough sell.
Yes.
It's funny though
Yeah.
that because I've actually had this work in reverse where people, and this was like really early on when I was way too cheap and like just churning these things out. Um it was a really dark time. um People were
Oh, I've actually, just as you said that, I'm still at a very cheap stage, and I so as soon as I launched the course, I had like a beta price. I had some people wanted like some obscenely low prices, and then I was just working with this person. She was like, "Oh, my mind's still blown from our session, blah blah." And I said, "Yeah, it's no surprise that some people charge." And I quoted how much I know you charge, and she's like, "Yeah, no, I'm very aware that I've gotten these very cheap."
yes, yeah. I know those people are super lucky. Yeah, you got to find somebody right in that sweet spot, like before they're, taking off or whatever. But I have had it happen where people have said, uh, like they said, like this is too cool for me. Like this doesn't, like yes, it's everything that I said. I can see it, but they do have a hard time living into it. And that's where I would say, well, you need to go get some therapy because you absolutely could, but it is different. you are showing up in a way that is, you know, I wouldn't, I hate, yeah, just the word vulnerable. I mean, I suppose it's vulnerable, but if you are comfortable, you know what I mean? Like with your story, and if you quote unquote own it, you know what I mean? Like you're not going, it wouldn't be a big deal, you know what I mean? At all. And so, and you want to show up this way. Like you came to me for this reason to tell this story. But I think sometimes people are still feeling a little bit victimized sometimes by you know, by what happened. And so there can be kind of this holding period where people are sitting on this thing for a long time and need a couple of more years before they are ready to go out there with it. So
Something that, I mean, I think that what might happen to some people is the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is to do with language,
mm,
because you say things like fulcrum and behoove and circuitous, and you can actually, link something on your website and the button says watch me slay. Now,
mhm,
not many people can get away with language like that without coming across stuffy or pretentious or whatever. And you obviously are an incredibly talented writer. And sometimes what I think, having looked at some, particularly yours is the one that jumps out to me, although
mhm,
obviously you want to show off that you can write. But the it is cinematic. It is not like, I would never tell a story that way, just because the types of stories I tell, I'm not going for that feel. I'm going for conversational. Every day I'm sitting at a dinner table. This is how I talk. So I'm telling
mhm,
it in the same way I would tell at a dinner table. I don't think that a bio like yours, for example, you wouldn't describe yourself to someone with those words. They are too cool for regular conversation, I think. So that was the question I had for you, which is, you seem to land on the language is there to be used, and it doesn't need to be simplified, it doesn't need to be dumbed down. uh, but I don't think a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people that they think now you should write like you speak, but you don't
mhm.
seem to fall in that camp at all.
No, I have beef with write like you speak. I mean, I get write like you speak in the sense that you don't want, I mean, I don't have beef with people who do it. I am saying I have beef with the idiom there, but like you don't it what it means is you don't have to sound like a pretentious dick. You know what I mean? Like you don't need to show up and, you know, with your tie, you know, on straight, like buttoned up to your neck and like speak like a professor. Um but I also think that write like you speak has gotten out of hand. Like I can't even read the internet. I'm so bored. And so I think that I personally I would be very bored writing like I speak. Like I like the act of writing would be boring to me if I did that. And so I think that, I mean, so you're walking that line where you're not getting so full of yourself, right? That you're just like making something that's just for you. But at the same time, it's you're writing, which is not the same as speaking. My brain, and I think a lot of people's brains have a different expectation when you're reading versus when you're hearing somebody speak to you. Like, I mean, there's so much on the internet where I'm just like, it's like you were like earlier when you brought up the person on LinkedIn who like says story time and launches into the story and there's no story there. Whatever they needed to say probably could was one sentence long, right? But she's like, I'm just going to tell this conversational, you know, laid back story, and she's wasted everybody's time. And so anyway, yeah, I think some people do what you're talking about very well. um and I actually, so when I email people, when I do my quote unquote email marketing, it is kind of hard for me because it needs to
It
be
is
more
email
comfortable.
marketing.
Yeah.
Every time you do quote unquote, you use the exact term that is meant to define what you're doing. I love it. Oh, she's being quote unquote vulnerable. No, she is being vulnerable. It
Well,
is
that
email
it's
marketing,
just those
Caroline.
candy words that get used all the time, right? And we think we know what they mean, but they don't. When some people
In your
say vulnerable, they mean like I'm going to show up and like air my dirty laundry here, right? And when I say
don't,
vulnerable,
don't
I'm
don't hate don't hate the word just because people don't know how to use it. It's a perfectly
right.
usable word.
I cringe at so many words. But anyway, email marketing is like it is more conversational, and I do kind of have to loosen up, which is hard for me to do. So,
I
unless
don't
we
know.
do.
I've read you more than I've heard you, and I think there is a very particular personality that comes through your writing, and I have friends that get just have no clue what I'm talking about, and I say, "I know, I love the voice of this writer." They just don't even know what it means, but it's difficult to talk the way you speak, the way you write. Like, I mean, I'm
Mhm.
sure there are some people that can pull that off, but the vast majority of people don't. Again, it's just different mediums. And I think where the confusion sometimes lies is people like I write the way I speak because most of the things I write are just oral stories that I would have told the exact same way to a person. I
Mm.
change stuff around. I use different words. I move the hook of the story up, which I wouldn't do in person. But I am basically just recording an oral story. I'm not writing as if I was writing a short story or a book. But I think what a lot of people don't get is like if this is meant to be read and not ever going to be spoken, then there's a whole bunch of other things that the written word can do that you cannot do when you speak because you just sound like a weirdo. And
Yeah.
I think perhaps sometimes it's just that, if there's power here that you're not tapping, then maybe you want to consider tapping into that power. Just because you never describe yourself that particular way when you speak, that doesn't mean you cannot use that in writing. At least that's the feeling I get about that.
Yes. Yeah. Um, yeah, exactly as you say. I mean, yeah, I had this discussion with people sometimes where they're like, yeah, but I would never say it that way. Like, that's exactly right, but I would never say it that way. And I'm like, well, start saying it that way, because you like this. I mean, I'm not asking people to not be themselves, but if you love the language and it resonates with you, if like the concept fits exactly, but you've never used this word before, like, so what? Use it. Now like, start using it. And so anyway, I think there is some stretching that we need to do. And maybe it's because of the whole like authenticity thing. There's another air quotes for you, like, oh, well, I'm not being authentic. And it's like, yeah, you are. You're being like creatively authentic, you are stretching yourself creatively and doing something that feels new, and different and hopefully exciting.
And on that note, if we want to send people, if people want more Caroline in their lives, is switchbladelemonade.com the best place to find you?
Yes. Also, come find me on LinkedIn because apparently I don't have enough followers. I need more LinkedIn
Yeah,
people.
I was going to. Yeah, I have this as like I'm gonna talk to her about this when we just finish recording. But like I don't know what's going on. Maybe you haven't realized that maybe occasionally you have to invite some people to connect with you and follow you. But you have the following of fake accounts. Like if someone puts up a fake account to try and
Yeah,
scam people, they will have more followers than you. That's
right.
how bad that has gotten. So
I know.
there's
I
some
was so
things that I
Yeah, I'm late to the LinkedIn game. I thought of it as like the old Pepal of like, social media networks. And so yeah, I got to work on it. But and I saw your post the other day where you were like, I wouldn't be on social media if I didn't have to be. And I definitely fall into that camp. And so I don't know what I'm going to do about it. Like I think I need to do more like speaking in groups or whatever, but like social media, like that's just not going to be my jam. I need to accept it. So
I have some things some tips for you that
okay.
I think you don't kill it off prematurely. I
Okay.
think even how well you write, it will be criminal to be sending those posts out for two people to like them, uh, and it doesn't take much, but yeah. Okay, so switchbladelemonade.com, people can find you on LinkedIn, and if they want to see the similar things but with pictures of your dog, then they should find you on Instagram, I believe.
Instagram, yes. And I'm Switchblade Lemonade on Instagram, not Carrie
Okay,
Yoga Bunny.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, but if you want some tips on yoga and beautiful imagery, then Carrie Yoga
Yes,
Bunny is who you should
she
look for
is
on
your gal.
Instagram.
That's right. Go find Carrie Yoga Bunny.
um, Carolyn, thanks for coming on the show. I'm glad we finally did this.
Yes, thank you so much, Francisco. It was lovely.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.